Will mentioned she was elected in 2012, and my screen just went blank. But then she was reelected in 2016, and we're going to reelect her soon.
She's probably gotten some awards.
Well, I only have what was online, so I don't have the awards. But
She's got 'em.
Janet was not born in Missouri. She was born in Michigan, and her family moved to Boone County in '59. But she got a whole lot of degrees from the University of Missouri, starting with a Spanish degree, then her law degree in '84, and then her master's in alternative dispute resolution in 2002. She's worked with the Public Defender's Office for a short 25 years. And she was also an arbitrator for FINRA, which she can tell us what that is.
That's it's the regulatory body for the Securities Exchange Commission.
Wow.
We do either mediations or arbitrations for securities related disputes.
I think we needed to in 2008. She's also done disciplinary hearing officer in Missouri Bar. She's published in lots of different prestigious journals. And then she serves on all these boards. Boone County Family Resources, Central Missouri Action, County Commissioners Association of Missouri, Cradle to Career. It goes on and on, but I'm going to mention the health department because that's true to my heart. She also, within the commission, is on works with all these different organizations, of which the Farm Bureau is one of them. I thought that was interesting, and representing, I think, the public schools on the Chamber of Commerce, some role. Says quarterly City of Boone County Public Schools.
That's an organization. It's a group where the Chamber of Commerce, the schools, county commission, the City of Columbia, and the chamber all meet to try to talk about things and make sure that we're talking about the same things, or at least know what's going on in each different wheelhouse.
Right, as the liaison.
Yeah.
Janet
that's together.
Hopefully can tell us about some of her awards, because I remember last time I introduced her, there was a real prestigious award, but it wasn't on your online biography. Thank you, Janet, for being there. We're really excited.
Well, thank you all, and thank you for having reached out. This is a fun group to talk to, and today has been a really interesting day. I have to tell you, it always feels like things happen for a reason. A lot of times things happen in a sequence that sort of makes sense. And I just got off a phone call with a group of folks who are working on a grant from the Missouri Foundation for Health. They're working with 4 counties in South Missouri, and they called me because they said, we want to know what on earth the Stepping Up initiative is. And that's something that we've been doing here in Boone County. You all have heard about it. But so I talked to them for about an hour about things that are happening here in Boone County. And a lot of that had its genesis in the Stepping Up initiative. But to kind of play off of what Alice talked about, what I've been working on since 2012 on the county commission, and a lot of other things as well, but really a focus has been work with folks who are currently or may become justice involved and often have substance use disorder and or mental health challenges. And a lot of that involvement has been because, quite honestly, of my 25 years as a public defender. Because as a public defender, I saw too often individuals who were where they were in various systems because they hadn't had access to resources earlier on. They hadn't been connected to the right resources, and often that had created a situation where, you know, we always hear that that model of you see bodies in a stream coming downhill, right? So it's as a public defender, I always saw those bodies coming downstream, and I always thought as a public defender, if only we could move back upstream to see how and why the bodies are ending up in the stream, and what interventions can we as a community make to keep people out of that stream. And so that's been a lot of what we've done, the work that I've been involved in on the county commission since 2012. And it started with the Stepping Up initiative. That was an initiative from the National Association of Counties. I'm advertising for them here today. And they worked with the national, I always get the acronym wrong, but it's the National Association of Psychiatry to look at that, because the primary focus, or the stated focus for the Stepping Up initiative, was to address the overrepresentation in our county jails of individuals with serious mental illness. In our county jail, for instance, when we started looking at that, there was an individual who had been booked into our county jail. Rusty Antel and I went through records and saw this one individual had been booked 52 times in 1 year.
Wow. That's
In
every week.
1 year, right?
That's every week.
Crazy. Well, and when you started looking deeper, what was the instigating factor for his bookings was serious mental illness. And doing things that weren't things that made people afraid of him, but made them annoyed with him, right? There's a big difference between public safety issues and just, gosh, they're just annoying. And too often that's what happens. So we, as a community, we're not an aberration, but we often use our jail and our emergency room as the holding place for people with serious mental illness or with substance use disorder. So the work with Stepping Up evolved from just looking at the jail to the various systems that are involved in people's lives, or that people may touch if they have those disorders. And one of the first things we did was we kept talking to people and saying, it's interesting that so-and-so doesn't know, that X person or X agency doesn't know about Y agency. And they don't know that they're dealing with the same population, or individuals in the same population. So one of the first things we did as a community was we held what's called a sequential intercept mapping.
Okay.
Fancy words for think about an individual and his or her trajectory through the systems. And this is something that SAMHSA designed, and Mari could probably talk to us about that. But SAMHSA looked at it and said, let's look at it as spaces in a person's life. So each intercept is where they might intersect with essentially law enforcement or the court system. Intercept 0, which has been created since we did that first sequential intercept mapping, is before somebody gets involved in the law within the criminal justice system. That's when somebody is decompensating and a family member, or they themselves, or somebody in the community says, Janet's in crisis, and she's standing on the street corner and pacing or doing whatever. She needs help. And what resources? So the sequential intercept mapping goes from that 0 intercept all the way through to reentry into the community. So if you get through the whole court process and then you leave the jail and go back into the community. So that's the intercepts. But what it looks at is what resources are available at each intercept. What resources and what barriers, or as a friend of mine says, opportunities for growth exist, right? To put a nice frame on it, right? To say, what is it that we need at each of those intercepts to have that person in a better spot? And so that first meeting to me was fascinating because, again, to think about all of those agencies that might be involved. When we opened that room, and it was over at the health department, we had about 50 people there. Lots of them did not know each other.
Yeah.
They never talked. They hadn't realized that they were, again, talking about the same population. The second time we did a sequential intercept mapping, when we opened the doors that morning, I'll never forget. I was standing next to Jessica Macy, who was there representing an agency. And I said, "Did you just see that?" They came in and started, and the conversation filled the room immediately because of that first SIM process, they had started to work together, and they had started to address things across agencies, across systems, to say, oh, when we're dealing with somebody over here, who do we need to talk to over in this other space? So that's been going on, gosh, since 2014. And we've had some good successes with it so far. We're still working through the process because it is a process, and probably will never finish. And so my apologies to Alice, who I think put the title of this together, because I'm going to jump around a little bit. But where we are now, I'll give you a little history about what we've done thus far, but some of the things that we're getting ready to do. One of the things, again, that Rusty and I, because Rusty was sort of my cohort in crime for a lot of this process. He's a great friend and a great colleague in this community. But we started looking at what's happening in our jail. That when we were seeing those booking records and seeing how long people were spending in the jail, and thinking, gosh, can we make that process better? Because both of us had represented people in that situation. We knew it from on a personal level, but we also wanted to look at it at a system level, and how can we make that better? And we knew from experience that a lot of times people stay in the jail a lot longer if they are there because of a serious mental illness has an impact on that. They're staying longer, they have worse outcomes, and then they cycle back through the jail at a higher rate. They recidivate at a higher rate. So we were like, let's look at that and let's kind of delve into that. And we thought, wonder if there's a way to get people together that are part of those systems that are interacting with those folks. And said, who would know if somebody has invented a wheel, let's steal it, because we don't want to have to we don't have to create it ourselves if somebody's already invented it. Exactly, right? You just you find somebody else who's already done it. So I reached out to the National Association of Counties, and I said, here's what we're looking at. Do you know if anybody's ever created something like this? And the lady I talked to, Nastasia Welsh, said, I've never heard of it. But she said, if these are the two counties that if it's happened, this is where it would have happened. She said, Ramsey County, Minnesota, or Johnson County, Iowa. Those are like kind of mecca, cutting edge stuff when you're talking about criminal justice issues. And so, and health related on the same side. So I called Ramsey County and talked to somebody, and they said, no, we don't have that. But if you find out somebody has it, we want to know about it, because we also want to do it, right? And then I called Johnson County, and they were like, oh yeah, we've been doing that for 5 years. And the kind of the thing that I knew would get people's attention was they had moved from a situation where they were housing a third of their population, of what should have been their jail population, out of county because they didn't have the space. That's when they started the program. They were spending a ton of money housing people out of county. after 5 years, they were within their population limits, and they were housing no people out of county. So they had drastically reduced their costs in terms of that, and they were doing better by the people that they had in their jail. So we started this, and we went to the then presiding judge, who was Chris Carpenter, and said, Chris, would you be willing for us to try this? And then we talked to Leslie Schneider, because we needed a judge to facilitate the conversation. Leslie was doing probate work, so it was like, well, she wouldn't have to recuse off of any of these cases. We got the public defender, we got the prosecutor, we got our treatment court commissioner, we got a bunch of different people, we got jail staff and our jail treatment folks, all in the same room. They all signed a business associate agreement so that there wasn't a question about confidentiality. And now there is this mental health staffing that goes on every 2 weeks, and people with mental health issues are referred to this group by a variety of sources. It can be their lawyer, it can be a judge, family can ask that they be referred, but all of those things are coming together and they're working through things. My favorite memory from that has been one time when Leslie listened to the prosecutor's statement of what was going on, and she looked at the prosecutor and she said, tell me again why you filed charges on this person. And charges were then dismissed, and a different trajectory occurred for that individual. So it works, and people are watching as individuals are going through the system and trying to make it better for those folks. So that's part of what's happened as a result. We've gotten a bunch of different things. Dwayne Terry has implemented different programs at the jail. We now have a mental health survey as people are booked. Then we have a more extensive one later on if it comes up that this person actually has some kind of mental health challenges or substance use challenges. There's more work that's done, and Dwayne actually has hired a full-time mental health professional in the jail, which didn't exist before. So the work that's being done has really paid off, I think, for the people of Boone County. What's happening now, and again, apologies, Alex. There's a lot of things that we've done, but something that we've had to do, and Mari, I think, can probably speak to this in terms of her help and involvement over in the health department. We've utilized services from people in county government and in city government, in the health department, and our community services department. We've kind of shaved off time for all kinds of people and all kinds of agencies to say, can you help with this process as we move forward? Because we didn't have the resources. And I can't remember who it was when we started to say what a great commission we have now, with folks like Kip Kendrick as our presiding commissioner. Yay. to have the kind of support for these efforts. Now we have the support, and we're moving forward with an individual the individual hasn't been identified, but the position in our budget has been established for a facilitator for what we're calling a Health and Justice Coordinating Council. So we're putting this together. We're also at the same time asking the state to see if we could fund a pilot program in 5 counties here in Missouri to establish these Health and Justice Coordinating Councils, to bring all of that efforts together and really look at what's going on in a community, and look at it in a very systemic way, to look at it across the sequential intercept mapping kind of model, to say, what resources does an individual need to keep them either out of the jail in the first place, or if they are already justice involved, to keep them from recidivating at that higher rate. So we'll have that person in our community services department to facilitate that process. The other piece of that kind of makes a lot of people is we are going to implement a data sharing process here in Boone County. We've explored through, again, National Association of Counties. We joined something called the Familiar Faces Initiative and sent folks, we sent Roger Johnson, our wonderful new prosecutor, and Dan Hannikin out to Johnson County, Kansas, to look at their program out there. It's hard to say that when you go, Kansas is doing something better than we are.
Lately, they've been
Johnson
knocking it out of the park.
Johnson County is knocking it out of the park. Johnson County has more money than God,
Yeah.
right?
Is Lawrence in Johnson?
No, but the cool thing is Johnson
So
County.
they better no tax, what is that?
Well, they're
rich.
They're rich.
Yeah.
They're rich people. It's rich.
Rich people.
It's a rich suburb, right?
Okay.
But
Suburb of Kansas City.
yeah,
Okay.
but they have created this thing called My Resource Connection. It's a wonderful data sharing platform that they created. They've actually shared it with Douglas County, Kansas. Douglas is Lawrence. So much more similar to us in terms of resources, in terms of, just size and everything, and just demographics. And it's working, and this data sharing platform is working. It's transferable to another jurisdiction. So we know that now. So we sent, again, Roger, and we also sent Dan Hannikin, who is the executive director for Into Action, our Great Reentry Program, the two of them out to Johnson County and Douglas County to explore what they're doing there. We also sent two folks. We sent Travis Lawrence, who is our CIT liaison for the sheriff's office, and Conrad Haig, who's at Love Columbia, down to Bexar County, Texas, which is San Antonio, to look at what they've done. And they've created some really interesting kind of riffs on the Health and Justice Coordinating Council, so that if somebody comes into the system and you know that even at the intercept 0, that these are the resources that a person needs, they can mobilize to get the resources to that person. If it's a bed, if it's a care coordinator, whatever it is, that we can do that. But it takes that coordination of services. It takes everybody together working by consensus. That's the model. It's not a majority rules. It's a consensus driven model. And so that's what we're looking at for starting this next year. Yes, ma'am.
So I have two questions related. So I'm imagining this database, how it would work is an individual would walk into me at Love Columbia. I'm working at Love Columbia, and I could put in their name and see that they weren't registered in this database, and we need to start from ground zero. Or maybe I would see they already have food stamps or SNAP set up, room at the inn. They know how to find that. Is that what it is? So
it does all of that stuff, and it depends on who you are as to what permissions you have.
Okay, smart.
Right?
Smart.
So it's not so as I've explained to people, I'm the gadfly. So they're not going to let me know much.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm on the gadfly level. But the people that need to know have the various permissions. It's set up like that. So
they know the confidentiality structure.
Right. And so, and it's and that's something that has been worked through. There's a lot of jurisdictions that have done this to make sure that you don't violate people's, whether it's a HIPAA question or just a general confidentiality question. But there's also, think of it as resources on that level, but it's also resources.
Could the individual log into this? Is it more provider based?
Provider based,
Okay.
Provider and law enforcement.
Yeah.
Because you think about it. So, if Janet is on the streets of Columbia and acting oddly, and maybe acting even more oddly than normal, right? But if law enforcement is being able to log into this, because right now it's really hard for law enforcement to know what to bring to a call. But if you know that Janet has a serious mental illness and that, she was just discharged from MUPC or whatever, or has been off her meds, then you're going to bring the right resources. You're going to bring your community behavioral health liaison. You're not going to bring a gun and a taser. You're going to bring a mental health. You're going to bring a CIT trained officer. You're going to bring, a community response person so you answer the questions with the right resources. Yeah. So that's a big piece of this. It helps everybody. It also helps law enforcement be safe. Yeah. Right.
That they're more what they're walking into.
They know what they're walking into. So they're going to be safer, and the individuals that they're interacting with are going to be safer and have better responses. Too often in other jurisdictions, we see it so often, right? That it escalates because you don't come in with the right knowledge, and you don't come in with the right tools. And so this will help us as a community be able to say, here are the tools. Part of that, quite honestly, is making sure that every law enforcement person, every first responder is CIT trained. Because too often, unfortunately, in our community, in our global community, first responders are the ones that are having to address these mental health challenges. CIT is crisis intervention team training. It doesn't make you a clinical psychologist or a psychiatrist. It doesn't give you that level of training. I went through it. People laughed at me because they were like, well, that's the week of the election and you're going to CIT. I'm like, yeah, yeah, it's 40 hours. And the standard is it's a 40-hour chunk of time that you learn about de-escalation. You learn about some of the things that law enforcement especially is confronted with. But when we just think law enforcement, we're thinking a little too narrowly. I think it should be all first responders, because a lot of the folks that respond to these crises are our fire department folks. The first kind of level of first responders are our 911 call takers. So, we've made that available to them as well, to make sure that they have that training to help them. There's set a bank of set questions that they can kind of go into as part of their process. But if that gives out and they're still on the line, they need to be able to do that. Another piece of that is that we're embedding in the 911 center a 988 call taker. So there's going to be that kind of interplay. So we make sure that
that's the mental health.
That's a
Suicide.
That's the crisis line, right? The 988 crisis line. So that person now will be in our 911 center to make sure that the correct resources are deployed for folks in crisis. So that's all happening. Yes.
So I was asked my related question. Are you okay if we go ahead and field two more from online before we go on?
Yeah.
So then my other question was, you said people hear about this part and say, like, what's the pushback? The sharing of that information, the man, capital T, capital M?
So people, this is just in my experience.
Right.
In my experience, when people will scream HIPAA really loudly, and it's like, and what they mean by that is no. Yeah. When somebody screams HIPAA at you, they're saying, no, we don't want to do it. Instead of asking, gosh, not only what good can come out of it, but how do you do it to protect people, right?
How can you?
Right. I mean, it can be done. It's being done in jurisdictions across this country. And it's just a question of how you do it. You don't want to wholesale it. I don't need that information. I shouldn't have access to that information. But the people that need it, you design the program such that they have access to what they need to do their job. And those permissions are worked through. And CJ, actually, who's on the line, CJ helped us to look through that at the very beginning when we were establishing that mental health staffing, to say, what is the mechanism to use so that you don't divulge sensitive information, or there's a permission to divulge certain information within a context. So that's part of the process.
Here's a quick yes or no. Ruth in the chat asked, do you know, is the bail fund part of your council?
So
video
they,
call?
so they're not.
Have they been in that
okay,
big room?
they, when we did the SIMs, they didn't exist.
Mhm. That's
So,
true, yeah.
right, they didn't exist.
Yeah.
And they've been part of conversations, but the Health and Justice Coordinating Council has not been as yet defined. So we're still working through that to figure out who needs to be part of that. There's gonna, just working through that right now.
Well, let's go to Mari. If you unmute yourself, we should be able to hear you through the owl, and then we'll go to the telemas.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes,
Hi,
thanks.
Mari.
Okay, hi, Janet. Oh, of course, my phone's gonna ring right now. Sorry, just excuse that.
You're good.
My question has to do, it's related to the Sarah's line of questioning. In my past life experience, I found that SAMHSA rules about any kind of disclosure are so much stricter even than HIPAA. And so my question is just, are you able to include in this system information about whether the person has received any mental health treatment? And if so,
Yes. Yeah.
so that's part of it.
Yeah, because you need, part of it is, if like one of the questions that I've fielded in kind of exploring this work, fielded from law enforcement, is they're saying, how can I know if this person for instance, has a professional relationship with Burl or Compass? How can I need to know that so that if there's a caseworker out there, I can connect them with their caseworker, right? I mean, that's if there's a relationship there, that's what's going to be helpful to you, rather than, again, using a taser, using a gun. Let's not do that. Let's connect them with the right resources. So that's part of the process, is to be able to have that kind of information, again, for the appropriate folks to say, how do you get these people hooked up with the resources they need? And for law enforcement, for sure, knowing that, that Janet's being seen by somebody at Compass or whatever, that's going to be critical.
States of mental health.
Substance. So Mari, I'm
SAMHSA
really
is what?
bad at the acronyms. Sam says substance abuse.
Youth and Mental Health Services Administration.
Yeah.
Administration.
Yeah.
And then last question would be the telemas. Sue, it looks like you have a question.
Yes, I do. I was going to say 25 or 30 years ago at our church, we had a woman that was a psychiatrist for corrections in Fulton, where they are accepting people in. And I happened to ask her the question, and she gave a program of how are these people different than what's on the outside? That, what are you finding that prisoners have, or ones that are being admitted into the prison system? Because that's where they were screening them, and what kind of prison they would go to from the state. What kind of problems do they have? And she said, basically, they have the same problems that people on the outside have, but they have never been able to get any help along the way, because they, usually they're poor and they just don't have knowledge of how to go about getting help. And so I thought that was, for me, a really insightful kind of cause. And you're kind of hitting on that kind of thing too, that if many of these people never would have even gotten into the system had it been that their problems were addressed earlier.
Right. I mean, and
The upstream.
it is the upstream
Yeah.
stuff. And so thank you, Sue, for that, because I'm gonna ping off of that to talk to you a little bit about what Alice actually put as number one.
Actually, Kathy did.
Okay.
Kathy Jensen.
Okay, so I don't know if y'all can see this, but this is the progress report for our upward mobility work here in Boone County. And this is the upstream. I can send it to you. I'll leave this one, but I can send you all the
Web
the link to it.
I'll
Yeah.
update it.
Yeah. It's great. So this all started, and some people have said to me, you shouldn't waste your time with NACO. NACO has done so much for this county, and I thank them every day because NACO, the National Association of Counties,
Okay.
has been just a godsend to us because they got us started on the Stepping Up initiative. They made available to us an application to get a grant from the Pritzker Foundation to look at prenatal to 3 work, and because of that, now we have a program that is a home visitor program for moms that are still pregnant, and then those kids early on. So we're doing a home visitation program because of NACO. But a few years ago, I got a phone call from a friend of mine at NACO, and she said, you've been really interested in the prenatal to 3 stuff, and you've been really interested in all these other things. She said, and the homeless issues. She said, would you be interested in applying for this upward mobility thing that the Urban Institute is doing? And it's the Gates Foundation is paying for it, and you'll get a bunch of technical assistance and a little money, and it sounds great. And I said, oh my gosh, yeah, because that would so help us as a community. And she said, super. She said the application is due Wednesday.
Yeah, I just say next week.
Well, it was Wednesday.
Yeah.
So I started making phone calls, and I got a lot of people together on a call, and I said, everybody was really jazzed about it, and it was a huge group of people. I had people from Ready, I had the Chamber of Commerce, I had Central Missouri Community Action, I had just a ton of different people all in the same room, and I was like, okay, guys, this can change lives in Boone County. And we have to submit our first application really fast. The first phase, I said, and they were like, well, what's really fast? How soon do you need it? And I said, tomorrow morning. And I heard this, this, and I thought, I'm glad I'm current on CPR because all these people are stroking out. And then, after a little bit, I said, okay, well, how about not tomorrow morning, which was Tuesday. I said, how about Wednesday at noon? And then it was a group exhale. We got it in, and then we were chosen for the next round. Yeah. And at that point, everybody could really work and get their time and do it really, really well. And we were chosen as one of 8 counties nationally, the smallest county. There was Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia, and all those kinds of big places got selected, but Boone County got
You
selected.
presented on this, I think, right after the grant was won, and described this.
And it was those people are still talking to me. I don't know why, but the thing that really struck me was we got a bunch of information in, and then started putting it together in that first application to see if we could at least get over that hump. Mm-hmm. And what struck me the most was the response that Darren Priest, who's the executive director at Central Missouri Community Action.
He was our guest a few weeks.
Yeah, Darren's amazing, and Darren is one of the kindest people in the world. But he's also he is not one to gild a lily, and his statement of why this was important for this community was so on point, because it really, and this includes, sort of alludes to that in this thing, because what he said was, this seems to be a community of great resources. Mm-hmm. But it has great resources if you can access the resources. Mm-hmm. And primarily if you are not in poverty and not a person of color. Mm-hmm. Because this is a community of, that has 2 sides that never meet. Mm-hmm. And that really told the tale. And I think that was really because we were very honest about who we are when we made that application. I think that's partially why we got included. And so this process that's been going on now since we got the award has really looked at at those disparities and has looked at the disparities and has talked about the disparities through what they call result-based accountability, and using that process and using that lens to understand that underlying a lot of what we see now in terms of resources, in terms of possibilities for populations, it's, you know, it's what you got and what you've gotten from generations. Yeah,
I'm
Dave.
feeling overwhelmingly ignorant of what you're telling me because I don't know what this program does.
Okay, so what this is doing is looking at our community and saying as a baseline that what we believe for Boone County is that everyone deserves the same opportunity for upward mobility, to reach the same level of economic success, of educational success, of workforce success, regardless of what side of the street you live
Okay,
on.
so what is done?
And so what we're working on, and that's what I was getting to, what through a lot of process, community engagement, through meetings and all kinds of stuff, they focused on 3 aspects of upward mobility to focus their efforts. The first is early grade literacy.
Mhm.
And Al Plummer is the facilitator for that work group. And what they're looking at, their strategic, they've identified 2 strategic actions. 1, to improve wraparound services for young children, and 2, the second strategic action is to improve early childhood experiences. One of those, for instance, is increase access to quality childcare, right? Because that's huge. And, you know, and talk about going upstream.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Because
really.
when you think about it, the stuff that we've been doing with stepping up and all of that, we are way working downstream.
Yeah.
Right? Those are folks. So because, you know, it's interesting to me, and as I said earlier, one of the groups that we involved from the get-go in the application for this, we involved Ready, and we involved the Chamber of Commerce, because they have to be at the table, and they have to understand that for those kiddos to make it into the workforce, we've got to put resources in early on for every child, right? And so that's a piece of that, is to say to everyone that early childhood education has to be front and center for what we do in this community. And that early grade literacy, if a kid's not reading on grade level by grade 3, we know what's going to happen,
But
right?
none of the funding here is opening up any slots for childhood, is it?
Well, so one of the things that, I mean, that's part of what we're doing is looking at access to childhood, early childhood education. One of the things, and this is kind of separate, but again, weirdly connected, the governor is releasing some funding, and it's targeted for law enforcement. There's some funding that the sheriff is going after to create sort of a pilot program here in Boone County to say, what does it look like to develop a 24/7 early childhood education center for law enforcement, for all of the folks that work on that law enforcement campus. So for 911 telecommunicators, for the detention staff, for road officers, and also something that, you know, that people don't think about, that's part of this whole process. We have one of the only juvenile justice centers left in the state of Missouri.
Wow.
Right? And
the adults?
well, they're closing them right and left because they are understaffed and underfunded.
Yeah.
You know, and ours is staying open, and we're sort of like one of the places that's taken kiddos from around the state
Yes.
still,
Yeah.
but we don't have staffing. And so one of the things that we're looking at is including them in the population that would be could have access to some, early childhood education options for their kiddos. So we can maybe make those jobs a little bit more attractive. Make those jobs a little bit more attractive for folks. And, appalling side note, Tara Eppy, who runs JJC, was telling me yesterday, those workers, their starting salary is $15.18 an hour.
Yep, it's abysmal. My son makes $14.78 at IV.
Right. You
He's
could,
16, he's
you
never
could,
had a job.
exactly. And so those folks that we're asking to care for those children who are at JJC, and the nature of those kids, because of Raise the Age was a great thing, but it's changed the complexion, shall we say, the whatever of that population. That population has gotten, it's much tougher. It's much harder to deal with. Those are much more experienced kids. They're bigger. And so here we have, your son coming into this making $15.18 an hour, and they're having to train them on the job. Mm-hmm. They're not getting pre-trained. So part of this is we're looking at ways to say, for a lot of these other positions, how can we sustain them and create something that will help those little kids have have access to what they need to be able to be successful. So I'm running out of time. First thing, early grade literacy. The second piece that they're looking at is fair and inclusive housing. And Jane Williams from Love Columbia is the facilitator for that group. They're looking at affordable housing. And they're also looking at increasing second chance leasing opportunities. And the third piece is jobs and workforce development. And Al Cobbins is the facilitator for that group. And they're looking at, sometimes we don't even know when we've created a barrier, but they're looking at employment practices. They're looking at all kinds of things to say, what are those maybe unintentional barriers? And then look at also the intentional barriers. Enhanced support for folks who are justice involved. Something that I didn't realize until Dan Hannigan told me a couple years ago, and we got it changed. But peer support specialists are hugely important for folks who are coming out of a jail or prison, especially, and for kids to hear those comments from peer support specialists. Peer support specialists by statute a couple of years ago couldn't be licensed if they had what? A prior felony conviction.
Mm-hmm.
What?
What kind of peer?
Right. I mean, that was what made those people good and to be able to be that person that somebody could listen to, and say, you've walked that walk. Mm-hmm. But, that got changed. But it's those kinds of things, that those barriers that you don't even realize are there until it just kind of gobsmacks you. And then the last thing is in the jobs and workforce development is for folks like your kid, right? To increase youth leadership opportunities. Because sometimes what we need to do is look at those kids and grow your own and give them the opportunity. What is it that they need to move forward? Especially kids that are in disadvantaged populations. So that's short and relatively sweet. What's going on with the Upward Mobility Action Plan? Honestly, this to me is one of the most exciting things that's happened in Boone County, because it's created the synergy around which so much work can be done and so much change. Yes.
And then in the chat for people at home, Dave Taylor has posted a link to the online version and the PDF that we're passing around. So people at home online can click on those links and open them up, and they'll be waiting for you when you finish your meeting here. You need to get going.
Relatively soon, but I see Dave has a question.
Yeah, just in the context of, advanced literacy. Okay, so generally I gather that the funding is to research issues. Sometimes you might find some other funding or a way to make funding available to solve a problem you identify. But one of my peeves for over a decade has been the suspension and expulsion rate of non-white students from Columbia Public Schools.
Well, yeah.
And I talked to Paul Harper and And Suzette Waters, I just think you ought to take the policy that we're not gonna kick anybody out of school anymore unless they've done violence to somebody. No one's going home. Everyone's gonna stay in the building.
Well,
I-
and to your point, because I've been sitting on this group that has been looking at that rate for the last 10 years, I guess. Frightening that, that here in Boone County, our rate was higher than any other jurisdiction. And it's the rate at which kids are referred to the juvenile justice system. And one of the biggest contributors to that is, as you point out, Dave, it's, when the schools, if the schools use juvenile justice as the default, if that's the default referral, then you got a problem. So one of the things that we've been working on, and it has to be policed religiously to make sure that if there's a default, the default is referred to FACE, because that's why we created FACE, the Family Access Center for Excellence. That's why we created that. And one of the biggest allies, I mean, this sounds like I'm his cheerleader, and in a way I am. One of our biggest allies in all of this has been the sheriff, because he, there, a couple of police chiefs ago, one of the things, it was a huge difference. That chief of police in Columbia thought that if one of his officers took a kid in his vehicle, that kid was in custody. And so thought that under the law, that meant he had to take that kiddo to juvenile. Dwayne has a totally different view of that. And Dwayne was like, no, he said, I don't believe that kid's in custody. I'm taking that kid to mom, to grandma, to whatever. He said, they ain't in custody. I don't have to take them to juvenile. I'm going to take them where they need to go, not taking them to juvenile. And so for him, he truly gets that, once a kid gets in that system, that first time is a shock. After that, it's easy. And you never want to have that first time, because after that, it's too easy to go back.
I see.
Right? You never want them in. And I mean, the data really supports that. It's like once they're in the system, they're 7 times more likely to end up in the adult criminal court system if they've been in juvenile. You never want them to get into juvenile if you can avoid it. So Dwayne has been a great advocate for that. Yeah.
We don't hear much from him at
Yeah.
Muleskinners, so that's some of the first information.
When he ran, we had good meetings with him about
Yeah.
this stuff.
Yeah, he's been a super advocate for all of this work, and I can't ask. I mean, I have friends around the country that curse their sheriff right and left, and I'm like, no.
Not now.
In this jurisdiction, we have an ally, and if he doesn't get it, he'll ask and he'll learn. And he sees the benefit. And so like when the opportunity for this, to have some kind of early childhood education thing coupled with his system, he was like, I'm willing to take that on and figure it out. He's done a lot of research. There's one law enforcement agency in the country that has something like that. So he's exploring that. He's going to figure out how to get it done, because it's like, how do you make that better? And if we can create that model for early childhood education through this, then maybe we can replicate it. We can start building it out.
That sounds like a wonderful benefit for the people who work in his department. I mean, really.
And then if we can expand it and have the folks at JJC, right? Those and the 911 call takers. That's the goal, is to have all of the people on that campus to try to work through this and work the bugs out, so that then we can get to something that can be replicated in our community at large. And thank you all so much. This has been great. I gotta go.
Janet, you didn't talk about, you're gonna have to come back because you didn't talk about your campaign.
About a year,
Yeah,
right?
you come back when you're running.
Don't we have a year?
Just make sure
next
we have
year.
signs and
Yes.
let us know how we can help.
Well, I appreciate it.
The time goes too quickly.
Well, the big thing is, I would love to finish these projects.
Yeah.
I want to get them established. So if I can do it again,
Thank
that'd be
you.
more.
Thank you, Miss
Thank you all. Be
You
well.
are a jewel. Hey, everybody. So next we're going to move on to our regular